It is Saturday afternoon, and we're ready for our next keynote speech. We're very happy to see everybody who has come back to finish up the final afternoon of the conference. I'm going to start by turning it over to Emily, who is going to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Professor Abram Andrews.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you here today. So I have the privilege of introducing our next plenary speaker, Dr. Abram Andrews. Dr. Andrews is currently the Interim Associate Director of the Student Innovation Center and an Associate Professor of English here at Iowa State University. He has contributed significantly to diverse fields, including academic innovation, business communication, human-centered design, and notably the intersections of artificial intelligence and writing. Through his former role as the director of ISUCOM Foundation courses, Dr. Andrews has led the redesign of first and second year multimodal composition courses at Iowa State to integrate project-based learning pedagogy, which has benefited over 5,000 students who take these courses each year here at Iowa State. He's also led a human-centered design project to develop an inclusive peer mentoring program for graduate teaching assistants in the English department, which I can say firsthand was a really innovative and effective way to improve mentorship experiences for our graduate TAs at Iowa State. The Association for Business Communication has recognized Dr. Andrews as an outstanding researcher and teacher by honoring him with a 2022 Outstanding Article in the International Journal of Business Communication Award, the 2016 Rising Star Award, and the 2014 Pearson Award for Innovation in Teaching with Technology. He's also received the 2023 Dean's Arts and Humanities Innovation Award from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And additionally, his recent work has been funded by the National Science Foundation in collaboration with Dr. Chukarev, with 2 grants worth $750,000 and $850,000 for developing innovative writing technologies. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Andrews on several projects now, with the most recent being our development of English 222X, an experimental course about artificial intelligence and writing. What has stood out to me about Dr. Andrews and all of our work together is his strong grasp of current and emerging research and his ability to generate innovative ideas and solutions. Every day that we work together, I learn something new about how to develop effective curriculum and how to create innovative lesson plans and generate exciting student activities, and how to be a creative problem solver. So I'm confident that his presentation today will reflect these qualities and provide valuable insights for all of us interested in AI and writing. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrews.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that introduction, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today about generative AI experiments in writing and learning. And I also want to give credit to Emily, who's worked closely with me on the course and the associated research, and a lot of the material that's been being presented today is not only not possible without her, but has in fact some of it been created by her. So as we get started today, I want to talk about the focus of generative AI. And I want to think about what it can do. It can offer diverse applications that will transform learning in higher education institutions. If we think about these class of tools, they're both the underlying models and the application layers. And these tools are ones that can help us generate text, code, image, speech, video, 3D, and all kinds of other things, such as computer programming, text, quantitative analyses. The emerging research in this area is already finding tremendous and exciting applications for education. For personalized learning, there's already a study that's available in the preprints that used generative AI as the underlying tool to create a sophisticated multimodal AI tutor for a course. And that study was, that tutor was able to implement research-based evidence practices such as distributed retrieval, and personalize the tutor to the student's individual level and abilities. It resulted in a 15 percentile point gain as compared to the control section. So this is already paying dividends. These generative AI type tools have also been applied to analysis. For example, here, a study that showed in computer science, students could be helped to break down problems into subproblems that then would allow them to develop coding solutions. Or here, a study that showed first ways that AI could assist teams and individuals in developing innovative solutions across the process, whether doing a pestle analysis of the external factors shaping a solution, to using the tool to create personas. This is a fantastic tool for instructional design, by the way, to all the way to coming up with potential solutions that can improve the particular problem. And here it carried all the way through to actually designing prototypes using generative AI. They were using, in this case, an Adobe tool in order to visualize potential solutions and prototypes. Of course, writing is not left out of this work. Some emerging papers have explored how writing can be assisted with these tools for creative writing, how it can develop solutions for developing innovative research questions. Here, this study looked at both breadth-based explorations and in-depth breadth explorations of research questions. And one of the things that's particularly fascinating about this particular study, and I think is relevant for all of us, is they started by interviewing experts about how they engage in the process of developing research questions. They did a design sprint where they mapped out what those strategies were. They created a model for how that worked. And then they asked themselves, and you'll see the little robot symbol here, where could the AI fit into this process and help? And then they developed a tool that was successful at helping people do that. So the most promising of all these generative AI tools are the large language models. In the work that I've done, I've been exploring all 4 of these tools. And in fact, in the course that we'll tell you a little bit about, our students are free to use any of these tools for any of the activities. And it's given us a broad sense of their capabilities. Of course, we can look at their actual features and capabilities. Many of these tools are starting to be able to take in files, to run code, to even see and output images. And this is always a moving sense of what's happening. Each week, it seems that these tools are adding new features. But of course, we know they have their limitations. They're not sentient. They're not authoritative when it comes to knowledge. They're not objective because they're trained on the human corpus, which itself is not objective. And they can't be ethical in the sense of making ethical choices, being responsive to and responsible for the communication that they put out in the world. That's for the human actors. And of course, we all know that there's lots of risks associated with these tools that we need to be sensitive to, from privacy and intellectual property issues to misinformation and bias to authorial and academic integrity. Even so, we know that these tools are likely to transform but not replace human intelligence in teaching, learning, and professional work processes. And a big part of the reason is that generative AI in particular works best with a human in the loop. These tools are not like software where you can set it and forget it or put it into a systematic process and forget that it's there. In fact, the most sophisticated uses of these tools are ones where a human is responsible for setting an intention, giving intermediate feedback, and interacting and curating the results of what these tools are capable of doing. And in fact, some of the emerging research on real-world applications is showing this exactly to be true. If you haven't seen the study yet and you're interested in generative AI, I would encourage you to check it out. They took a group of professionals at the Boston Consulting Group. They incentivized them. If they finished in the top so many percentiles, they actually got a bonus or a raise or something like this. And then they had a control group and an AI group. They gave them several different tasks. And what they found is that relative to the dotted line, which is a line of difficulty for humans, the line for AI, which is the blue line, tends to fall inside and outside of what humans are capable of in a somewhat unpredictable pattern. Some things AI is actually better than humans and some it is not. Depends on the task. They did 2 tasks to see how AI could help. For the first task, which was pretty complex, they were developing a new product and developing a marketing plan, prototyping materials, pretty much everything that would go into a product launch. The group that had the AI outperformed both in quality and quantity at the control group. And the group that was trained did even better than that. But in the second task, they actually underperformed. The group with AI, which you'll see over here in pink, and the group that was trained with AI in the blue, underperformed the control condition. It's because in the second task, it was equally complex, but the distinctive element was that it really called for human judgment and interpretation. So this just illustrates the fact that these two tools will be transformative, but they require a strong sense of their capabilities and human interaction in order to really achieve their greatest potential. So what does this mean for us as educators and as teachers of writing? Well, my research has suggested to me that students need AI literacies, but they also need practice with situated disciplinary applications. Learning how to use these tools in a general sense is not enough. We need to know how to use them in specific contexts so we can attune to their strengths and weaknesses. But along the way, because we have to act as a human in the loop, to give feedback, to exercise judgment, we need self-regulated learning capacities. And so if we think about a model of what students in our disciplines, and in particular in writing need, they need all three of these things to combine into their capacity to engage in creative processes with AI. We're trying to learn a little bit about the frontier of what this looks like for writing in the experimental course that's happening this fall. It's really an exciting course because we have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, master's students, and PhD students all in the same class, all from many different disciplines, learning all of the skills that they need in order to be effective to use these tools. We've already had some early interest in what we're doing, and I want to share with you a quote that came from this article that was put out by the ISU News. This is from a MFA student here in the English department at Iowa State. She says, "I was nervous about AI taking over my skill set as a writer and a communicator for the past few years," says Burr. "But what I learned is that AI, at least in its current form, can't replace writers or fully take over tasks in any field. It needs guidance and clear instructions. She took the class because she was a skeptic. She was concerned. This was a threat to my livelihood. But through the experiences in the class, she had a kind of transformational experience." She continues, "Personally, it's made my research much more efficient because AI can give me a list of the most relevant, credible sources about a topic, along with short summaries. It completes in 20 seconds a task that might take me hours of scrolling through Google Scholar." One of the things I thought was really fascinating is that Hannah Burr, this student, was talking with the reporter and Emily and I, and one of the things she said is that working with AI changed how she thought about her writing process, which was already pretty sophisticated as an MFA writer who also does nonfiction writing. And what she said was, "I'm starting to think about what am I trying to accomplish? What's my process? What are the steps it's going to take me to get there, and how can the AI help me?" And one of the things I would suggest that's really important and valuable about how people interact with generative AI as writers is that it helps them become more sophisticated in their metacognition and more thoughtful and mindful about process techniques. So how can we put that to work, and how can we begin to engage students and instructors around the challenges of generative AI? Well, I want to suggest that there's three big mindset shifts that we have to engage in if we want to adapt these tools effectively. The first is that we need to think of students as acting as humans in the loop, as their primary role as learners. From a paper from Mullick and Mullick, they suggest our guidelines challenge students to remain the human in the loop and maintain that not only are students responsible for their own work, but they should actively oversee AI's output, check with reliable sources, and complement any AI output with their unique perspectives and insights. So we need to teach students how to use these tools in responsible ways, which also mean in ways that emphasize their own learning and don't detract from it. As instructors, then, we also need to shift our focus. Whereas in the past, we may have been tempted to think of our role as covering information or working with students until they can master isolated skills. Now we might think more about how they can inculcate evaluative judgment. Here, and a quote from a paper, "Evaluative judgment is a learner's capability to make decisions about the quality of the work of self and others. Promoting evaluative judgment can prepare learners to work in an AI-mediated world as it shifts the focus from being successful, yes or no, to coming to understand how success is constituted." Again, we're starting to see a theme here, pushing students to think about the decisions, the choices, the processes, the techniques, as much as the underlying fundamental knowledge set or the core foundational skills we might need them to learn. Lastly, we can think about the AI itself, not just as a robot or a programmable assistant, but as a form of adaptive support. That's the role it can play. And it helps, I think, to think of it in terms of social learning. And here, this comes from Mike Sharples, who also presented at this conference. A systems view of cognition distributed among humans and AI systems opens possibilities for a new internet of tools to enhance conversation and of the web as a medium for social learning among humans and AI. The question becomes, what roles could generative AI perform in the social learning process? Can it help us set shared goals, perform tasks together, and converse to reach agreements? One of the things that I like to suggest about AI is that it can be this incredible, powerful tool for individual and group personalized learning. It's like a teammate that's tireless, willing to go over and over and over your ideas, help you find better ones. And just like a peer at any level, maybe sometimes it makes some mistakes, and we have to exercise our own judgment in order to be effective at our task. And we have to do it within the context of a larger learning community with an instructor as guide. Now, if we think about what can we do with these tools and start to apply some of these principles, there's been a lot of suggestions for different specific applications and roles. One way that I've liked to think about them is along with Bloom's taxonomy. If we think about a typical learning sequence, we might first ask students to encounter some basic knowledge, some concepts, some skills, and we might want them to understand or remember or apply. And in this sense, AI could serve as a tutor, or it could serve as a surrogate student where students actually provide explanations to it, or it could provide simulated experiences that allow them to apply knowledge. One of the things that Ethan Mollick has said about AI is its incredible, one of its incredible abilities for teaching and for learning mission is its ability to generate and to analyze examples. So we can get repetitions with skills and knowledge. The other class of applications could be ones that go higher up on Bloom's taxonomy, and this is where we can think about analyzing, evaluating, and grading. We can think about how these tools can serve as an exploratorium, or a mentor that provides feedback, or a teammate that facilitates collaboration. A really promising area of research is AI or machines as teammates. And there's a huge area of research there that has a lot of really interesting things to say. And of course, obviously, we can use it as a tool to accomplish tasks. But a final category, and this is one that I think is easy to overlook, and we've actually had a lot of success working with our students and they've really adapted to, is using these tools as a way for students to have on-demand, personalized self-regulation and metacognition practice in the form of AI as a coach. Students in our course have already, in their choose their own projects sections of the course, started to use these tools as journaling prompts, as ways to reflect on self-set goals, or as ways to challenge themselves to stick to goals set for particular courses, or even by particular instructors. So if we think about now transitioning to how we can put this into action in a classroom, I want to illustrate some examples. And I first want to talk a little bit about the types of AI literacy students in almost any discipline will need. They'll need to learn how to prompt and effectively work with generative AI tools. And I want to suggest that we can do that by first taking a deep breath and working on this step by step. There's a really fascinating paper that just came out. One of the things we know about generative AI is it doesn't work the way we would think of normal coding applications to work. In fact, generative AI and large language model tools tend to produce better results when they are asked when we either provide a chain of reasoning or we ask it to provide a chain of reasoning itself. And so this really fascinating study tried out this technique. We've known that asking the tool to think step by step helps it solve all kinds of logic problems, math problems. And so they compared what is the best actual phrasing we can do to get the AI to do that. And they compared very simple examples like, let's think step by step. Let's work this out in a step-by-step way to be sure that we have the right answer. And they tested it. And the winner was take a deep breath and work on this problem step by step. And I include this study for the humor, but also to illustrate that there is something nuanced and necessary about engaging these tools, that there isn't a black and white user manual, and that there are all these little areas that are more like art or technique that we have to master in situated contexts. Chain of thought prompting is one of these underlying techniques that the paper is sort of building on. It refers to the idea that if we start with zero shot, that is just asking the model to do something, and then we do few shot, the instruction plus an example, that does pretty well. But then if we go all the way to chain of thought prompting, where we do instruction, example, and reasoning, what we tend to get is much better performance. These approach combines it, enables complex reasoning capabilities through intermediate reasoning steps. You can combine it with few-shot prompting to get better results on more complex tasks. Building on this, a lot of practitioners have suggested a technique called mega prompting, and it's one we adapted for our class. And this is our version of a mega prompt template. It incorporates a lot of the best advice about how to prompt LLMs. One thing that we know seems to work well in many situations is telling the AI explicitly what its role is in a way that describes the purpose and context for the interaction. Another thing that works well, and this comes straight from the advice given by OpenAI and a lot of these large language model tool providers, is to give the instructions for the task as precisely and concisely as possible. More information is not always more valuable when it comes to what to do. You can also integrate examples and information, and these can be pretty sophisticated. You can do both examples that illustrate or exemplify the desired output, and you can actually even provide information or content or data that should be used in the output. And you can also specify the output format. Now, using this detailed and specific of a mega prompt is not always warranted for every task you may have, but if you're trying to do something complex, it's worth taking the structured approach. In fact, we've used this with our students. Here's an example where we've asked AI with a relatively simple version of this mega prompt to help us create a brief on ethical issues relative to AI. And the key thing is I want you to know we provided both notes and a structured draft outline for it to work with. And you will get dramatically different results if you supply the underlying ideas that you want it to work with and the structure for the ideas than if you just asked it for something. And I think this is a really good illustration of why and how this type of prompt works. Now, the second big thing we want to learn beyond just prompting is, so you know how to do something, you have to still make choices about the right way to use it. And this means we need ethics. And I think our students have some real challenges here, not the least of which are the fact that generative AI ethics are pretty murky territory, but also because they're learning about this in the context of institutions and educational systems that are really often setting policies that are really flexible. So at Iowa State, for example, we have a policy that says some classes may say it's not allowed. Some classes may say it's allowed with attribution. Some say, yes, use it, but in limited instances. And others, like our class, say, use it all the time. Every way you possibly can, we want you to maximize its use. And there's good reasons why individual instructors, courses, and disciplines may need to choose any of these options. But for students, this is pretty confusing. Anytime a policy is that different from class to class to class, and the stakes are very high in terms of academic dishonesty, that's a recipe for difficulty for students. Even more so, some students really it gets blurry in a hurry. This is from an article in, I believe, the Chronicle, and it talked about an instructor who said their students didn't know is Grammarly a grammar checker? Is that AI? Is that cheating? Do I have to disclose that use? And you think about in a year or two when Google and Microsoft have AIs right in your word processor, and it seems like just a function of the tool, it gets difficult in the hurry. Students need help navigating this. So one of the things that we did, being innovators that we are, is to try to say, can we have the AI help students navigate that issue? And we built an AI tutor prompt using this mega prompt technique. And we provided an AI ethics student guide where we assembled guidelines for students that could help them navigate these issues, as well as a faculty guide with lesson plans on how they could use both the tutor and the materials in their classes. And you can access this by searching for my name. It's the top post on my Substack right now. But let me show you a little bit about it. Here's the guide. We try to come up with a simple mnemonic device. I've really been inspired by media literacy theory of the SIFT method, which has been really a helpful tool in teaching students about how to evaluate sources. So we have awareness, integrate mindfully, guard integrity, uphold accuracy, identify limitations, data privacy, and ethical considerations. And we built a detailed guide for students around these principles with minimal guidelines and suggestions. We try to keep it concise. And why do we do that? Well, because students have limited bandwidth for paying attention to us, and so does the AI. So we wanted it to work for both. Then we created a prompt, and this is adapted from research from, again, Ethan Mollick, a Wharton School professor, and his collaborator, Lilith Mollick. And this prompt tells the AI, I want you to act as a tutor and be really friendly and helpful, and I want you to help me understand the material. But we adapted it by including our whole entire ethics guide. And this is what's the result. If you paste this into your favorite LLM, we tried it out with Claude, we tried it out with Bing AI, with ChatGPT, with Bard. It will actually talk to you about ethics of AI and give you some choices. And these choices are directly to sections of the guide we created. And it even works if you're a faculty member. I've had several really good conversations with it about how to set policy. Now, the magic of this is that the guide is founded in research-based principles. But then when I use it, I can ask the questions I want to ask, and I can bring up the examples I want to bring up that are relevant to me and to my world. And this is exactly what we found happening with students using the tool. Some of them put it into Bing AI, and Bing AI actually looked up their school's policies for them. In this case, Iowa State, but it could work for another school. And they could say, well, I'm in this class. What's the policy for that? The other thing that happened is students started to ask really reasonable questions that they might have been a little embarrassed to ask in a class or talk out with a peer. For example, here, how common is it to acknowledge AI as part of your work? It seems like a lot of people would be embarrassed to admit that they had help with their work. And the AI had a really nice response here, and you can go back and forth. I did a similar exercise pretending to be a professional, and I was saying I'm a marketing professional. Do I need to disclose? And the AI itself suggested, well, your client may be a little disappointed to find out you did AI to do your work, but it really is ethical. And we had a really engaging discussion about that. The other thing we did with this is we built in scenarios because we recognize the need is that students need these nuanced discussions. And so for here, we have a scenario of unintended plagiarism, which is one of the unexpected problems of these tools that can help students experience some of these issues. When we did this in class, we asked our students about how they experienced this, and they said, this is way better than a lecture. Definitely would love the experience of interacting and being able to ask our own questions. But I think we can do even better if we embed it in a class. So we give students some time to do this, and then we have a group discussion around it. So our lesson plans give you 3 different ideas about how you can do that. So AI tutoring, incredible applications on a lot of different domains. It could be a lot of fun. The next thing I want to talk to you about is how it can influence our approach to process pedagogy. You know, across all of our disciplines now with generative AI on the scene, faculty will need help transforming learning and assessment practices to focus on authentic learning. And some of the things I would suggest is that if you feel like your traditional approach to a task is broken by generative AI, you might turn to whatever is the most relevant scholarship of teaching and learning in your field. It could be things like active learning, experiential learning, team-based learning, project-based learning, because these forms of experiential learning tend to be less vulnerable. Generative AI becomes a teammate who's helping with the process rather than a shortcut to not doing the learning task. And so I think these are really good models to think about. In fact, almost all institutions have great guides for these, and they transition across our disciplines. But if we think briefly about some opportunities within writing, we can think of it as an adaptive assistant. So let's apply that tutor concept once again. Let's imagine we're in an intro-level writing course and we want to teach students about rhetorical appeals. One of the common problems we have is that when you think about ethos, pathos, and logos, the rhetorical appeals, students often start off with an initially very superficial understanding of those principles. The ethos is, and then they just point to a fact or a big word. What do we do to push them past that understanding? Well, we can have AI act as a tutor, and we can do repetitions. We can simply give it the concept. Here, Emily prepared this example, and it worked fantastically. The student just narrates, I'm in a class, I need to know about these. And the AI said, sure, I'm glad to help. It went right into providing examples and quizzing and explaining yes and no answers. And it was a really great way for a student to explore in a way that seems more interactive, more engaging, and potentially more personalized than a multiple choice quiz at the end of a short reading. Another potential application is to use it as an exploratorium or a teammate. Here, an example of this could be applied to, again, a similar kind of writing course where we're looking to improve students' persuasive writing skills. We could have them experience in brief the entire process of coming up with a persuasive argument by first having them think about a scenario where they might have to write messages that are persuasive for many different audiences about the same topic. In this case, we're doing a community garden initiative. And how might I approach using ethos or pathos and logos appeals for these different audience members, local residents, schools, local businesses? Okay, looks great. Let's pick one of those and kind of see what an initial draft might look like that implements that kind of a strategy. And even better, can I evaluate it and to see how effective it is? Now, this doesn't replace the student creating their own arguments, but what it can be is an incredibly valuable way to get them to understand what the disciplinary goals are so that they become comfortable understanding the evaluative judgment they need to be effective in their own work. Lastly, one of the potentials for these tools is that it empowers you to do the thing that is most, I think, powerful about project-based learning, which is inquiry, focus, and student choice focus. And so here we created a technique that can prompt students to create their own problems. So map out your problems. Think about what the problems and sub-problems are. And in our case, we wanted them to use generative AI. So we had them think about what is the role of the human and the AI for the specific task you're laying out. And how can you prioritize those things you think are most important for the human relative to that judgment that you have about what constitutes quality. So the final area I'd like to look at, and I want to try to put this all together for you in a major example, is that educators really need to be able to innovate and transform for their programs and curricula to do this focus on self-regulation, collaboration, and leadership. In a field like our own that is dramatically impacted by these tools, which is computer science, this paper calls for the idea that what we're seeing is that we need to shift our curricula, and it's reminiscent of the evolution of roles from a software engineer to a product manager. Whereas before we just needed to code, and then when you became a product manager, you had to start to think about the bigger picture. We need to start to think about the bigger picture sooner, faster, and more deeply, even with students in undergraduate work. And I think that's a huge, amazing opportunity that we have, that we can do that. So with AI in writing, I'm thinking about how can we do this? What are the challenges we can address? How can we move ourselves further up the ladder towards that self-regulative level? I really think generative AI can help us address some outstanding challenges. This article by Matthew Overstreet is on writing as extended mind. He argues that the limitations of human working memory is one of the greatest bottlenecks on learning writing skills at every level and for almost every type of student. One of the things he suggests that we can do is that we can use technologies to allow for increasingly sophisticated acts of cognitive offloading. In this paper, he's looking at tools like citation managers, tools like note-taking tools, outlining tools. This was written before generative AI, but generative AI can do that and more. The other thing that we might look at is solving for fluency. One of the things that we know can happen with students is certainly at certain levels of their development, that a lack of fluent language generation can really constrain novice writers within short-term working memory capacity. Whereas fluent encoding and extensive knowledge can help writers take advantage of long-term memory resources. So a lack of fluency can get in the way of thinking. One of the interesting findings that I think is relevant here is a paper on expert versus novice learners talked about the difference between people playing chess. So what do chess masters do? Well, what they're able to do is read the table at a glance. It's not just that they can think X many moves ahead as compared to a novice, but it's actually that they recognize patterns in huge blocks. They say, oh, that's the X maneuver, or that's the X defense. And the sooner that we can get people to recognize those larger patterns, the better they're able to engage in the activity at a higher level. The third piece here that sets this up is this idea of solving for microfeedback. One of the most promising uses of any kind of technology relative to those challenges we just talked about is giving smaller micro-learning chunks that provide more feedback opportunities with many scaffolding steps that are easier for underprepared learners to meet and build a growth mindset for. With writing, we're always struggling against the sheer difficulty of the cognitive effort involved. Whatever level you're at, you have that experience and you grapple with it. But AI has the potential to give you a boost and a wind in your sail that makes it more likely for you to stay motivated and persistent. So I have a post that has a ton of techniques we can use, but I want to cover one larger process here. And I want to explain the principles for it. Process guides for generative AI assisted activities, that is, a guide that goes through multiple steps in a writing task, can help students learn how to act as a human in the loop and exercise evaluative judgment for situated tasks, because what you're asking them to do is do the step, evaluate the output. Is it good enough? What do you need to decide, this one or this one? Now move forward. So it turns it into a decision stage experience. The second thing that we can do is we can create prompt templates using that mega prompt format. And what we can do is we can condense a lot of disciplinary knowledge and know-how into that prompt. We want to talk with students about it, teach them those skills, but then we can show them how to enact it all combined together. So one of the things we did in this class was a prompt competition. It built on a specific case where students had to create a persuasive white paper. We had them first just try it, put it into the AI and see what you get. And not so great, right? Then we had them go through a structured process with pre-writing, writing, and revising steps each step of the way. They were working with AI, provided suggested prompts that could help them complete that task with AI assistance. This all happened in 1 hour and 15 minutes, by the way. First, here's the case competition. We're going to create a persuasive message on climate change. You're going to do research. You're going to identify a rhetorical strategy. Oh, and did I mention you have to adapt it for 2 different audiences? Big task. And here, we embedded information about what are the forms of disciplinary specific evaluative judgment you'll have to exercise in order to do a good job. And here, we even gave them a rubric that pointed out how that could be evaluated. So as we go through the process here, what does this look like? I have a rhetorical analysis prompt. I give the basic idea and the 2 audiences to AI, and it gives me some suggestions about how I might implement those strategies relative to that audience. Okay, so now I'm learning about how to apply these principles, but also in the flow of a writing process. Then we do some research, and AI can help us. Let's try out some search techniques and see what kind of data we get. And let's identify a few that are going to be best for our purposes. And then let's let AI help us summarize these. And in fact, we can even make sure it gives us some quotes. And now that we have some research on persuasive strategies, some research on the content, let's create a strategic outline. And we provided them with a mega prompt template and a mega prompt example. You can see here, this one reminds what the task is, create an outline, and it gives it the information on rhetorical analysis and the research notes. And then we get a very credible, useful outline that then we use the LLM to write a draft for. Lastly, we have it revised. We put the whole draft into Bing AI and say, hey, can you fact check this for me? And this prompt actually identifies those claims and evidence that need to be fact checked and auto fact checks it with 3 or 4 pieces of evidence. And it will say things like, well, this seems like a pretty strong claim because 3 out of 4 back it up, but the 4th had this question. And then finally, we had the LLM evaluate its own work. And this is where it kind of got funny and comedic because students started gaming the task to see, what do I need to do to get a perfect 50? Or if I put it in this one and versus this one, what's the score? But the result was something like this. They had a white paper. In this case, this is the one that I produced, but I used the exact same techniques and I did it in the same hour and 15 minutes. Executive summary, 3 big issues facing AI in higher ed, and a nice set of recommendations. And then I forgot the part where I have all the references Bing AI gave me from the fact check, but that should be here as well. So the student reflections afterwards I thought were pretty interesting. One, they were really motivated to engage to try the AI techniques and writing strategies in class. They were really into this and they were competitive. They were trying to get it done. They were dividing and conquering in their teams, trying out different strategies, picking the best one. So they were really thinking about judgment as they went. Second, we noticed that they were really critical and discerning in their judgments. They weren't afraid to say, I don't think the essay after all that process was that much better than the one we did in the first one. And other groups said, whoa, it was way better. And then they wanted to argue about it. And then third, a lot of them were really excited. They said, wow, I would really love to see what I could do if I took more time. And at each stage of the process, I invested more of the human in the loop to make choices, decisions, to do revisions. And the reason I point this out is not that this process technique is going to result in this amazing AI did the essay and it's perfect, but what it's doing for student motivation and focus within the class, and how if we adopt the same kind of approach to other situations, how it could really get students in a place where they're motivated, their decision making and they really see the possibilities of the disciplinary techniques we're teaching them. Now, at this point, I'm fairly well used my time. I want to turn it over to a Q&A, and I want to hear what you want to talk about. But I do want to highlight that if you're interested in more information about my course, I do have 2 more slides ready to go, where I can talk to you about some of our learning objectives. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today.
I'll be helping out with moderating our questions here now. So we'll be going back and forth between questions from the room and questions from the chat. So we can start out with a question from the room if we have one.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting talk. I just have a quick question about the last project that you described. After the evaluation, did you do a plagiarism detection over the output essays?
So we actually did not do that, but you absolutely could. We did the SIFT method in order to evaluate the accuracy to avoid misinformation. But in other classes and other activities we've also done things like looking for bias. So we had them examine an output for bias, and you could also do the plagiarism checker.
That's very interesting. And how about the plagiarism within the class? Because they were given like similar tasks, so how likely their output essays are similar to their classmates' output essays?
So this is a really good question. One of the things that I found that I've been doing a lot, and I've been teaching my students to do, is that if I have very specific information, particularly from specific sources or from very niche topics, I will actually provide quotes, and in the prompt I will tell it keep the quotes and keep the reference as I'm working and processing the data. And so I may even go through multiple stages, and at each stage I'll have a little thing in the prompt that says keep the parenthetical citation, don't change the quote. And so I think if I'm handling data that is quoted material in any form or fashion, I will do that. If it's just general information it's providing from a general query, then yes, it might be a great idea to run it through a plagiarism checker.
Thank you.
Move into our chat Q&A perhaps, or can I smile it from this view? Yeah, that would be great. All right. So we have a question about which policy would you use for the kind of assessment that used to be an essay?
Absolutely. Well, I actually was asked about this very recently, and one of the questions we hear a lot is this the end of the essay? And yes, it's the end of the night before essay. Any essay that can be done the night before is done. It's over with, right? But for composition instructors, those that teach that first or second year writing type course, we're both most affected by this, but also best prepared, because frankly, the danger of cheating on those types of assignments has been around for quite a while. Paper mills, plagiarism, mosaic plagiarism, and some of the strategies we've used to try to address that are the ones that are being recommended to everybody else who does writing as a form of assessment, which is to use process stages. So have students develop a set of research notes and to tag and organize those notes in a way. Have them do an outline, have them explore multiple different theses and different argumentative claims they can make relative to that thesis. Have them do drafts, multiple rounds of revision. Not only does that defeat the impulse to get desperate the night before and turn something in, because now we're doing little steps that feel more manageable, but also if the AI helps them in those stages, it doesn't really disrupt the learning, right? They're still getting the learning, they're still making choices. So I think process pedagogy is a big piece of it.
So what you just said is a portfolio assessment.
That could be as well. And also once you get to know a student's writing, I think a lot of instructors who have encountered where they think students may be turning in work say, this doesn't sound like you, and it doesn't really meet the assignment goals. It gets some of that wrong. Let's talk about how you can meet the assignment goals. We don't need to accuse students. We don't need to catch them. All we need to do is redirect them to the valuable learning we're asking them to do.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, this is super fascinating. Makes me wish I was a composition professor again. But I know that you've been responsible for shaping the first and second year communications curriculum.
Yeah.
If you were going to integrate what you've learned in this experimental course campus-wide, what kinds of activism do you think you'd have to do among your faculty and graduate student community? And how might you overcome those obstacles to refashioning kind of English 101 in the model of this?
Yeah, I think I will say that one of the things I'd like to say first is that I often get asked the question by like reporters. So I bet all your faculty were just really scared and climbing up the walls. And I've actually found that our colleagues, especially those who teach writing, were cautiously curious about these tools. That was their reaction by and large, because I think folks who teach writing day in and day out, you're always looking for something that can be a way to engage students. When I talk to some graduate students about this, one of the things I emphasize is that we always have to keep reminding ourselves how hard writing is when you're getting going and when you're started. And if these tools can give them a sense of possibility, progress, potential, give them a way to stay in the game. I think even those of us who have just experimented with these tools, I hear people often say, well, I just use it as a way to get started and I never actually use anything it generates, but it's a nice way to get over the blank page. And I think that that can be an excellent way that almost any instructor, especially writing instructor, can integrate it. I think as we start to think about these writing process techniques and we get into places where it's all well and good for active learning, it's all well and good for practice-based exercises on how to do a thesis or how to take research notes. I think the place where we start to get uncomfortable as instructors is, how do I make sure an individual student was responsible and achieved individual learning? And that can be a thornier place. So I think if I were working to run a workshop, as we've talked about doing for faculty, one of the things we want to do is get in a room and talk about how we can do some of these types of process techniques I illustrated. But I think we also have to have some serious talks for those of us who are really committed to the idea of helping students be accountable, how we can do that in a way that is not adversarial and not damaging to the teacher-student relationship.
I think that takes us to a nice question from the chat. So what about moving into English language learners? Recently, this person's student said that she thought she was always impressed by what AI wrote and she couldn't do any better. So they are wondering if you have suggestions for using AI with an EFL learner.
Yes, this is a great question. One of the things I would say is, if we focus on this idea of helping students with evaluative judgment, so it's not about did I do it wrong or right, but can I be a judge of it? That's a sneaky way to get people more engaged in the outcome. And we had a great example in our course. One of the things we did in the very first week is ask students to pick any kind of writing relating task. We did a matrix. What are the things that you love when you write that you get like a lot of joy and flow from? And what are the things that are really hard and dreary? And then we had them try to see if they could use AI to do something that was hard for them. And one of our students, completely unprompted, on their own, said, I've been told I don't have great sentence variety. And rather than having AI rewrite his sentences, he had it create a table matrix with examples of repetitive sentences from his writing, and then list some techniques he could use to rewrite it. And even then had it quiz him and try to rewrite using those styles. And so I think there is a way that it certainly is available to us to say AI can replace the learning we want to do, but can also fuel the learning we want to do. And if we challenge students to move from it did the work for me, I got to the result, to how can it help me better understand the goal, the skill, the technique, that can be a way to start to address those types of questions.
That is pretty relevant to another question from the chat. So they wonder what your comments are on AI hampering students' creativity and not involving out-of-the-box thinking on their own.
I do think that I want to be clear, there are very legitimate concerns with these tools. One of the things I've heard people talk about is the fact that how many of us once upon a time used paper maps to drive, and since paper maps are hard to use while you're driving, you would have to like memorize the instructions for how you were going to get there and the landmarks, and now maybe we have these devices, and maybe even in our car, and when suddenly we don't have cellular connectivity, we're like completely lost and helpless and we don't know what to do, and we have to pull over and do whatever we do. So I do think there is a danger that these tools, we can get into a habit where we go to them first. We don't think our own ideas first. One of the rules I've heard some professionals use is the 10-80-10 rule. Do the first 10% by yourself, completely away from the AI. Do the middle 80% with AI, and do the last 10% completely by yourself. And that's a way of ensuring your own accountability to your own ideas, your own wisdom, your own knowledge of the task, and your own sense of how is this going to play out in public when I send it out there in the world. So I think that's very much a part of the process and solution. I think the other thing that we can do is orient people to be more problem solvers. So the idea is that part of the fun is how do I set up the task? So that before I even start, I think about what are my goals, what are the strategies am I going to use, so that we sort of resist the temptation to fall into easy habits. But frankly, if you do easy habits, then the AI doesn't give you very good work anyway. So I think it also sort of, for now, is curbing that a little bit.
We have other questions in the room at this point.
I just want to find out, what was the point you were making about mapping the AI onto Bloom's taxonomy? I didn't get clear there whether you were warning or advising people to use it.
Yeah, so one of the ways that I like to think about tools is where can they be used within the learning journey? And I think a lot of us think about, maybe I start a week or a unit, and the first thing that I need to do is introduce some concepts that are going to be key for students to even be able to make sense of what we're doing. And I think at that level, the first level of Bloom's taxonomy is super valuable. A little bit further. This is the problem with being a maximalist when it comes to slides. There we go. So when we're on the first level of Bloom's taxonomy, that's where it can really help with just looking at knowledge, concepts, getting familiar. I think of that as the first part of a week, where we do some reading. We want students to just have a working definition of some ideas. The second level of Bloom's taxonomy, I think, is where we start to ask them to practice with those concepts. We want them to implement them into the world in some kind of active learning strategy, some kind of process technique. And that's where having the tool act as a mentor or a teammate or a tool that can help them accomplish tasks can be really valuable. And then I think as we near the end of a project or we near the revision stage of a project is where it can be really valuable to use it as a tool to prompt metacognition. So for example, I might have students do an AI tutor activity after the reading in the early part of the week, say a Monday. On a Wednesday, I may ask them to try to implement that technique and get feedback from the AI on how they did. And then on a Friday, I may ask them to reflect on what they learned from the week's activities and how they could implement it in the next week as they go forward.
Another question from the chat was about how Malik and others have suggested that we build up a sort of repository of effective prompts, and they find this to be possibly ineffective for staying organized. And they're asking, do we all need to be prompt engineers and collect our favorite prompts, or is there some way to keep track of all of the prompts?
I think this is a great question. When we were putting together this course, there are some really amazing repositories out there of prompts, and they are some that are general purpose, some that are unique to communities. So there's a lot of value in that work. But as we all know as teachers, where there's a lot of repositories of teaching tools and lesson plans and methods, you can also drown in those resources a little bit. And one of the things that I've found is I have tended to latch on to some memorable examples of techniques and approaches that I really like to use. And then now I fill some facility with that. And so I tend, unless it's a very long mega prompt, to want to just do my own writing each time and to interact with AI. That having been said, I think one of the things that could be really interesting and is really valuable is in building these prompt and activity structures, an activity explanation with a concept, a knowledge, and a focus. And one resource that I can highly recommend is a text called Text Gen Ed, which is on the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse. That's an open source, edited collection of activities you can do with AI that follows that format of a research-based rationale, an activity, and in some cases an actual prompt you can use. And that I do think has tremendous value.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. This was wonderful, Abram. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the following. I mean, prior to AI, English 150, 250, those first-year writing courses, I mean, nobody clamored to sign up for them. They were required courses, and the mindset that I think a lot of people have and had was that they're taking this to learn to write. Now that ChatGPT can do the writing, you know, what's the role that we have to, what do we have to communicate, not just to learners, and we continue to communicate, but I think it's also administrators, legislators who might have ideas about like so what do we do? Where are we to maintain our relevance in that?
Absolutely. when all this news broke and when we started on the journey, back when ChatGPT first became a headline, my initial thought, and I still think it's true, is that this makes our skills and expertise more valuable, not less. When we think about a student who comes into a 250, maybe an engineering student, think about a future where generative AI is fully integrated. We're teaching these process skills that involve prompting techniques, and they learn an architecture where they can generate a research-based argument. And they have a facility and a fluency with being able to swap out prompts that could allow them to do an argument for a lab report that's academic argument oriented. And then they can do a similar report that now is for a client and involves a lot of similar moves, but they may have to address it in a different way. And that giving students that sense of fluency with the ability to have a literacy for persuasive technique, for argumentation, but now also for process technique, also for prompting, and having a sense of evaluative judgment about the goals relative to an audience of purpose. Yeah, that just seems like everyone's going to want more and more and more of that kind of skill, because those who have it, here's the great quote: AI is not going to take your job. Somebody using AI is going to take your job. And I think that's where we have to go, is to say that those students who learn these skills are going to run laps around those who do not.
Great question. Another interesting question from the chat is, have you noticed any loss in interest in using AI from students as time goes on due to the novelty effect, or has their motivation remained high?
I would say I think it's still pretty high. One of the things we did notice is that it's very fun in the first class to have the AI write a poem in the style of, or write song lyrics in the style of, and it's a great way of illustrating the way that AI has facility with established genres and styles of writing and can just produce text magically. But that kind of effect wears off fairly quickly, right? I do think that our students are getting now more of a taste for what they're capable of. Our final part of the course is to have them do a creative project of their own choice. And our students are doing some really incredible ideas. We're going to learn more next week about what their final full-fleshed ideas are, but just to give you a sense, some of them are doing things like creating full character Reddits for non-player characters in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And they're creating like all these characters with all these skills and dimensions, and all this energy is being invested in creating an amazing story. Others are doing things like with rudimentary first and second year coding skills. They're developing browser extensions that are mashing together the capabilities of multiple tools in an environment that can interact directly with anything you're using. And they're really stretching their abilities in ways that are a year ahead of when they'll be learning that in the classes. We also have folks who are solving real world problems like, can I create a tool that would teach logic relative to coding tasks to first year students, and can I create a workbook that has executable files and that can directly integrate in a Jupyter notebook. So we have students who are doing some really phenomenal work, and I think there is a novelty factor, but then once you start to get into the domain of what are the crazy, amazing applications I can make of these tools, all of the excitement comes right back. And so it's just a matter of keeping to learn new techniques and envisioning new applications.
Thank you so much. I believe that's all that we have time for in this session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.